Today we're talking about how I spent 3 months in Paris with my 3-year-old and how you can come live and work in Paris with your family too. For those of you who are new here, I'm Aurora, and on this channel I'm talking about different ways you can expand your life, you can travel, even if you're a solo mom like me, even if you have kids. I hope by sharing my experiences, I can help give you the steps, the courage, the confidence to make your dreams come true, whether that's just traveling, moving abroad, or following your ambitions wherever you are. So I like to talk about a 4-part strategy for moving abroad with kids, whether it's just temporary for a few months or whether you're moving abroad for a little longer. So for me, that 4-part strategy is 1, you need somewhere for your kids to go to school, or you need a homeschooling plan, so school education. You need somewhere to live, somewhere to put your head at night. You need 3, somewhere to work. So I'm assuming you're not just fully retired. So I'm talking about people that actually need somewhere to work, like a co-working space. So of course you can probably work from home, but it's nice to get out of the apartment from time to time. And the 4th piece is community. And with community, I mean, how are you going to get friends, a network of people that can help you when you have questions and times and needs, but also the wider community. I'm assuming if you're going somewhere and you're traveling there, you also want to get to know local people and culture. And sometimes for us busy working parents, it takes a little boost to do this. So we want some networks built in that help us build and form community and get to know the local culture. When we're moving abroad, there's sometimes a 5th component, and that is visas, right? You need to be able to legally enter and stay the country. So today we're talking about Paris, and disclaimer, I am not a French lawyer, so I'm not going to talk about the ins and outs of what is legal and different types of visas. I'm just going to talk about my experience and generally what I've seen people been able to do. So okay, first, why 3 months? Now, I picked 3 months for a couple of reasons. First, people coming from countries like the United States and Canada, when they go to Europe, they're able to usually stay for 90 days out of every 180 days in what is called the Schengen zone, which includes the vast majority of countries in Europe. So most people are able to go visa-free to countries such as France and stay there without getting some sort of special kind of visa that requires proving a lot of things. The other reason I chose 90 days is that if you are applying for some other kind of visa, for example, in France, there's visitor visas. There are some temporary, there are others that can be renewable up until the point you get permanent residency. And for those visas, you're usually required to show that you have a 3-month plan. As I said, again, I'm not a French lawyer, and sometimes what is required depends on the consulate or the sub-agency where you're applying. So having a 3-month plan in place can be great if you just want a temporary experience of living in Paris or anywhere in France, or if you're planning to come for the long term and you just need to sort out that first 3 months and then see where you go from there. Okay, so getting right into it. School, this is the first component. The good news and the bad news about France is compulsory education now starts at 3 years old. This is great if you have young kids, because what it means is that there are lots of school options for kids that age. If your child is 3, then of course they have the option of public school. But even if your kid is 2 or 1, there are a ton of childcare options in cities like Paris, including bilingual options, English language options, Mandarin options, Italian options. There are a whole host of education providers for the young age. Because education is mandatory, people are really used to sending their kids to school young. And then people who have kids that are 3, 4, 5, who don't feel comfortable with public school yet and want something more flexible, really rely upon these small private schools, which means there's a market for these schools and they are everywhere. The bad news is, of course, if you want to homeschool your kid, then France might be a tricky option for you. I've definitely seen, it is possible to homeschool in France. I'm not saying it's not, but there are a lot of extra steps you have to take, so it might not be your first choice. So for those of you that your kids are already the right age, and the age for starting school in France goes from January 1st to December 31st, that's how the cutoff is. So your kid actually could be 2 years old and be required to go to school. Or if you want to put it in a different way, be eligible to go to public school. So you'll have to look at your child's age. So if they are eligible for public school, then you always have the option of just enrolling them in the public school. And the way you do that, I'm not going to do a full how-to, but throw me in the comments if you need that. You do it through the town hall, usually in person if you're already here. So if you're coming on a 3-month visitor visa, you don't have to prove before you get here that your kids are enrolled. Once you get here and you get your lease, and we'll talk about that a little later. Yes, you can get a lease even through Airbnb. You're going to go to the town hall and register your kids in the public school and you will get a slot. If you're applying for a longer visa, then one of the regulations most consulates ask for is proof that your kid is registered in a school. So if you're planning to use the public system, you're going to need to do this all a little bit further in advance and at least get some paperwork from the town hall, they call them the Marie, showing your kid is registered or you're in the process of getting them registered. If, however, you're not planning to jump full into public education, for whatever reason, for example, if you're only going to be here temporarily and your kid doesn't already know French and you're not planning to educate them in France forever, you might want to have a little more support in English. Or if you're like me and you're coming before your kid is eligible to be in the public system, then there are, as I said, a host of private schools that you can reach out to. And registration is pretty simple. It's as much as calling or emailing schools, then having, hopping on a Zoom call and filling out the registration paperwork. Some of these schools, they really do fill up fast, but what I've learned is with a lot of the international schools, especially in Paris, people are moving in and out. There are often extra slots. And the school that my child ended up going to, there were kids that only came for a few months of that year. And the contract that I signed, at least, allowed you to enroll basically on a month-by-month basis. As long as you gave them a month's headway, you didn't have to pay for the whole year. So it's definitely possible to come enroll your kid in a school for just a 3-month period. If you want your choice of schools though, you want to do this early, maybe as much as a year in advance. But don't worry, if you don't get around to this, there are other school options. So what school did I choose? I chose a little Montessori-based school called Ecclesia. And really there were tons of other options that seemed to be bigger and maybe like a franchise where they had multiple locations, although this school does now have 2 locations. But I actually chose this location because they did the same music program that my daughter and I were doing in upstate New York. So there's a music program called Music Together. And they were using this curriculum at the school. I loved that. I wanted her to continue doing music. And so I ended up choosing the school and I was very happy with that. All the kids, they went outside to play at the park about 3 times a day most days. They did tons of arts and crafts. There's definitely a lot of paint on my daughter's dresses. So, don't dress your kids in their best and finest to go to preschool. And yes, there was all kinds of music and my daughter was very loved and supported. The program was bilingual in English and in French because my daughter wasn't really speaking a lot of English even yet when we got here. And so I really wanted to make sure she got the foundation in English before we decided to just throw her into something completely in French, for example. Okay, so let's say you've got your kid registered in school, but now you need somewhere to live. And housing in Paris is tricky. I've heard this is the same case in a lot of French cities, but I know for Paris, it is incredibly challenging to find housing, especially if you're not a French citizen with a French work contract. And if you're coming for 3 months, that's not you. Normally, a lot of us these days would just turn to Airbnb, which is what I did at first. And I was looking and there were lots of 3-month rentals. The problem is French housing is very regulated and there are special kind of leases you need to enter into. And at least when I was looking on the platform, in order to get a 3-month lease, you needed to prove you already had a certain kind of visa to be here. So a lot of those weren't open to me. And as I was looking further, I found other options, and pretty much all of them said they weren't available for people with children under 3, and I had a 2-year-old. And I wrote a couple of the places and heard nothing back, and I was thinking this is a little challenging. So I actually ended up turning to booking.com, and that is not the only solution. There are other platforms called Soulager and some French platforms, but those platforms, as much as people rely on them all the time, they're also known for having a lot of fraud issues. And the last thing I wanted to do was to be arriving in Paris with my 2-year-old and to not have a place to stay or to be constantly worried about some fraud situation. Not that booking.com is perfect, and there were definitely some kerfuffles along the way, but yes, I looked at booking.com and I was able to find a place within a 7-minute walk of my daughter's school. It wasn't the most luxurious place, and actually there was some issues getting into the apartment the first day, which were stressful. It was still a private management company and they had to let me in, and of course we're off a very long flight, and then the person is saying, oh, I can be there in an hour, in 2 hours. You know, we did end up waiting on the street for a while, and there were some kind of a little bit of mold issues, but it wasn't extreme. It was still livable, and we did spend 3 months there, and it was nice and convenient. I loved the area. It was, as I said, right near Eclosia, which is in the 15th arrondissement, which is an area with barely any tourists. You won't find a lot of information about the 15th arrondissement online, and the information you do see will often talk about it being a really boring place to live. I would disagree. I think if you don't have kids, maybe the 15th arrondissement is a bit boring, but there are actually parks and things to do for families everywhere. There are so many playgrounds. It's beautiful. There are cafes, restaurants, lots of metro stops within, you can hop on the metro and in 20 minutes you can be to all the major tourist sites, sometimes 40 minutes depending on which side of Paris. So you are by no means out in the middle of nowhere, and it's quiet and calm and great for kids. So for my situation, I was able to take care of the schooling piece and then the housing piece for the 3 months with, not too much struggle. If you are looking to move to Paris and you need some help with the housing piece, feel free to DM me on my Instagram or write me in the comments, and I might be able to help you out. My final word of warning about the housing piece, though, is while Paris is not New York City, this is not one of those move abroad for under $1,000 per month videos. Paris is a major city. It's expensive. If you're looking for a 3-month rental that's suitable for a child, and you're doing it from abroad and you're not French, you are going to pay a decent amount of rent. And I'm talking about in the 2,000 to 3,000 euro range, most likely. Some French people will be shocked. You can pay much less, but again, I'm talking about if you need temporary child-friendly housing in a good neighborhood and you don't have a track record of being French, you're probably going to pay in that range. And the dollar these days is less favorable than it was when I first booked my apartment in Paris. Moving on to the third component, I was talking about co-working. Now, as a lot of you know, Paris is famous for its cafes. There are cafes on every corner, and sitting them and watching people is what makes life in Paris so wonderful. But what you do not want to do, please do not do this, is just pull out a laptop in one of those absolutely beautiful cafes, at least not without asking the staff first. And I just wouldn't do it. For me, even if I could ask, and I think maybe it would be possible, I think if you don't want to be committing a major faux pas and risk getting kicked out of your local cafe and then having to walk by with your head in shame, I suggest you go somewhere that is visibly open and advertising
for télétravail or co-working. And there are also plenty of these spaces, so don't worry. My favorite, again, within about a 10-minute walk of Ecclesia, the school that I chose, is called Voie 15. And it's along the old abandoned rail track, which might sound scary, but the abandoned rail track is actually now a hiking pathway and it's absolutely gorgeous. Voie 15, like some other co-working cafes, are actually co-working cafes in the morning and afternoon. And during the lunch, they either close the entire cafe or sections of it to people who are working on their laptop. So that's how they make the money. You know, they're open in the morning while they're prepping the lunch. And then in the afternoon for people that want to do remote work there. In Voie 15, you can often sit in the back section of the cafe, even during lunch, or there's a downstairs section too, which is not very nice. But again, if you really need to stay there, you can do that. And that is absolutely free. You just make sure, you know, you keep ordering coffee and cakes and being a good visitor. Another one of these co-working cafes that also serves as a restaurant is called Le Shack in Opera. It's a much more upscale environment and it's more downtown in the tourist district. It is beautiful. I don't go there a lot because I would need to get on the metro when it's super crowded, but it is lovely to go there. There are also co-working spots that are open on a paid per hour or subscription basis. There are good things and bad things about these as well. You know, for me, I actually like being in the public cafes because then you're kind of getting that energy of just people walking in and out, a little more people watching. Whereas, you know, co-working spaces are often just, for me, slightly more serious. But if you go to a co-working space a lot, you might have a chance of even making friends there. And for me, I also needed somewhere that was occasionally going to be open 24/7 because I might need to call into work in the middle of the night just due to the time difference. And it wasn't ideal for me to be at my booking.com apartment because it was tiny in the middle of the night doing some work call with my daughter. So really the only option, it was going to be either to book a hotel to do the very, very important work meeting or to go to a workspace that was open 24/7. There are not a lot that are open 24/7 that don't require you to have a monthly subscription, but I did find one and it's called La Permanence, like the permanence. And I think there are about 4 locations. You can get a subscription that includes X number of hours per month. And the good news is, you know, they're open 24/7. I didn't end up going in the middle of the night. They say they're 24/7 and you scan a QR code to get in. So I trust that they are. And they have, the good thing is also private rooms that you can book. So if it's a really important meeting that's coming up, there are kind of sound booth rooms and then larger rooms that are not that expensive. So you can book your time, but then you can also book a room and you can do it in the middle of the night. So if you really need a solution, there is one for you. And then finally, there are also libraries. I really enjoy the American Library of Paris. And yes, we don't come to Paris to just be Americans, but there is something nice about having access to a bunch of English language books. There's English language story time for kids. There's all kinds of activities. The American Library of Paris was set up during, I believe, the First World War. Gonna have to correct me on this, but what I do know is it's the largest English language library on the continent of Europe. And as I said, they have all kinds of great activities for kids, for adults, for families, and they have space for co-working. They do have a membership requirement. It's not super cheap, but if you're going to actually make use of all the family activities, the children's activities, then it's probably worth it to you. So that kind of segues into the final piece, which is kind of community and culture. Yes, you're here, it's because you want to learn French culture, but sometimes you do need English language support. So something like the American Library of Paris is great because it's a network of English-speaking people, English-speaking families that can give you support. There is another English-speaking families network called Message Paris. Believe right now it's €50 per year. It does get you a discount on the annual membership to the American Library of Paris. And Message
It has events all the time, and when I mean all the time, they have, I think, 4 or 5 different districts in Paris, and there'll be as much as 12, 20 activities per week being organized, and this is everything from expecting mothers, older families. There's a forum where you can ask questions. So you get a lot for your 50 euros. You get everything you need to get started. But of course, you do also want to get to know France, and maybe you want to even learn a bit of French. Now, of course, there's all kinds of language schools, and if you want to be studying 20 hours a week, there are even university programs that can get you student visas. But if you're a parent and you're working, you might not have time for 20 hours a week of study. But the Alliance Française in Paris, they have semi-intensive classes and that run 2 weeks or a month, depending on the time of year, that are about 9 hours per week though. So that's still a lot, but then they also have some workshops that are 2 weeks long or just, a 1-day workshop. And when you sign up for a class with the Alliance Française in Paris, you're charged an annual membership. But the thing is, so you can just come and maybe do your first month. You can take some French to really get you started. And that 1-year membership also comes with an entire system of support. There are activities nearly every day of the week. These are walking tours of Paris, they're museum trips. There aren't a ton of things that are super family friendly, but there are things here and there, but there are also things during the year. There's even career advice seminars, so if you're planning to stay longer, it can be a great resource. There's a library that thankfully does not charge very much for copies and printing, so if you need to get some administrative stuff done, the library staff are very helpful. And if you do decide to stay out in the 15th arrondissement like I did, you can get to the Alliance Française in about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So it's also great if you're staying out in the 15th, you can just hop over. And it's a great first step into French culture. The teachers in general are very warm and opening, and you can also ask them questions about life in Paris, and of course meet other expats who are interested in learning French, who will be your classmates. Of course, there's always Facebook groups, just going out and meeting people. I've talked on other videos about some other major expat groups like Internations. There's also Meetup here with tons of groups in English and in French. So there's all kinds of ways you can make community here in Paris if you're here for 3 months or for longer. So what about you? Have you come to Paris for 3 months with kids? I'd love to hear your recommendations in the comments. And if you have other questions about moving to Paris temporarily or in the long term, feel free to ask in the comments and maybe I can do a video about it. And if you're interested in traveling or moving abroad with family, you just want to follow my journey, make sure to subscribe.